First of all, thank you both so much for popping on tonight. It's A, nice to see friendly faces and kind of catch up a bit. And B, I know it's been a stressful start to the year, and hell, it's been a stressful last couple years, particularly with the pandemic. So I appreciate y'all making the time and engaging in this. I got to say, I think Dave is winning the battle here as far as backgrounds, given that his cat is posing, posing. It's pretty fantastic. Why don't y'all introduce yourselves really quick? Dave, do you want to go first?
Sure. I entered my political career by making history as the first out LGBT state legislator from outside the city of Seattle in the history of our state. And after serving in the legislature, where I was chair of the House Environment Committee, I now serve on the King County Council in my second term from South King County.
I did not actually know you were the first out legislator outside of Seattle.
Yeah,
That's
it
amazing.
was at the time I came out of the closet the year before I ran for office, and my
Wow.
mentor at the time said she loved me, but it's too bad because you won't be able to run for office now. Because at the time, the
Wow.
thought of an out gay legislator representing Kent was unheard
Yeah.
of. That's when gay rights were a wedge issue the Republicans used against us. But I said to heck with it and did it anyhow, and won, and been doing it ever since.
Well done. That's fantastic. Remind me, what year were you first elected?
2001.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, thank you for being a trailblazer on that. And
It's
then we've
still
got Jessi Murray on
sadly,
the call as well.
it's still sadly such a recent history that was
Yes.
considered a deal breaker.
I know, isn't that crazy?
We've
Um,
got two folks saying that you make them feel young, Dave, and congratulations, by the way. So, so thank you for that. Sorry, Jesse, I cut you off a little bit
no worries. I talked over you first. So my name's Jessi Murray. Going on the theme here, I am co-chair of Seattle's LGBTQ commission. I'm an out queer woman myself. I am someone who started in activism primarily in reproductive justice and equity in healthcare, especially for women and LGBTQ folks. Including, I worked on the Reproductive Health Access for All Act that passed in 2019. I'm also a former candidate. I ran for the 43rd LD House Rep Position 2 this past year. But right now I am back at the co-chair seat in the commission. So
So, Jesse,
I also, I,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can't compete with Dave on background, really. I'm sitting on my bed primarily so that my dog doesn't whine the whole time, but my dog
Oh,
is right here next to me sleeping, and she may make an appearance later. So I may
uh,
get some points for that.
I think we will welcome a dog appearance for sure. That'll definitely win points with folks. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on. Jesse, I got to ask, since you just ran, God, I guess it's a few months ago, but does it feel like that, or does it feel like it was 2 years ago? Like, where is it at this point?
It both feels like it ended 2 weeks ago and like a lifetime ago.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I I would say my pandemic experience was a very different one than most people's, where I had declared not too long before everything started, and
Hmm.
so I was working full time. I have a tech job where I try to do tech for good sorts of things. Um, and then I was campaigning basically full time on top of that. And so after the primary ended, I suddenly hit the boredom that everyone had hit, you know, 4 or 5 months prior. And it just feels like there's kind of a before and after for
That makes
me
total
because of that.
sense. Yeah, that must have been a little surreal for sure. And now we have, nothing exciting going on politically or in the world to keep us busy or distract us or make us feel a sense of, helplessness, I'm sure at times. And of course, I'm kind of talking about the elephant in the room, which is the impeachment process and the attack on the Capitol. God, that's a full week ago now. It feels like, again, this is one of those things that feels like it was yesterday and a lifetime ago. Uh, what have been, I guess my first question is, where were you, what were you doing when you heard the news that there was this, attack happening. The Capitol had been breached.
Dave, you want to?
Sure. I was actually on a Zoom call with the Sound Transit CEO, Peter Rogoff, who had a career in DC. He was a senior
that's
aide
right.
to Patty Murray, and I think my husband came up the stairs and was kind of like trying to tell me something was going on, and then Peter kept looking off the side, and I think we both kind of decided to wrap up our call. We were both so interested in what was happening on the TV that we kind of quickly wrapped up what we're doing.
It was kind of surreal, wasn't it, to be like, wait a second, this is happening right now? What about you, Jessi?
So I was working as well. Interestingly, earlier in the day, my colleague and I had been trying to explain to our coworker who works in El Salvador kind of what the Electoral College vote was. And he was like, oh, I heard something was happening, but I thought it was like a bunch of violent mob people coming. And we were like, oh no, like that's not a thing. And then I got a text message not too long after that from I did the Institute for Democratic Future in 2019. And so we still have a WhatsApp chat, and someone just texted, there's an armed insurrection that has seized the Capitol, basically. And it was very surreal.
Yeah, that moment where you just realize that everything, the kind of worst case scenario is happening. So fast forward a week, Donald Trump's just been impeached in the House. We don't know what's going to happen with the Senate trial, though it sounds like McConnell's going to try to delay it until Biden's actually in office. How are you feeling a week later? What are the emotions, or what are the things you think we should be talking about?
Go ahead, Jessi.
I missed the second half of that because my internet froze. So yeah.
I can dive in. I don't know that I'm feeling a lot better a week later. I'm happy to see impeachment. I'd be happier to see conviction later. I think we need some real accountability, not symbolic.
Do you think that's possible, Dave? Are we going to get 17 Republicans?
I have no idea. I don't know. I can't predict what goes on back there, particularly among the Republicans. The other thing, I find my happiness in the old cliche of think globally, act locally, to find the joy in the, you have this disaster happening at the national level, but we can still go work, clean up the park in our neighborhood. That's not the right analogy, but develop parks in our neighborhoods.
But you can act. Now, I hear you, where it's like, you can't fix this giant problem, but you can act in a small way in your local community that does make a difference.
And those of us in positions of privilege or elected officials, it's important for us to speak out and condemn this and point out the hypocrisy and racism and just complete and utter disgust at the president, at the Republicans who facilitated this, and not to mention the seditious thugs who broke into the Capitol.
So Adam in the chat actually has a really good point that I loved, which was he said he really identifies what you're saying, Dave, and feels like, I don't know if you've seen the photos of Representative Andy Kim, cleaning up trash in the rotunda after the attack. But it felt like one of those moments where it's like, I can't do anything right now, but I can make this small difference and try to make a little difference. And I think that's a great philosophy.
All of us in activism or elected office, I think, face that all the time, that we have to challenge the cynicism, the patience, and do it by while we work for the long-term change, find those victories along the way that are short-term achievable.
Are you kind of in the same boat, Jessi, where you're trying to focus on certain things that you can control?
Yeah, I think it's always a balancing act. I think we can't just write off the federal government. I think too many of us have basically said, it's a mess, what can we do? And I think that's abdicating some responsibility. Even if I can't control whether or not Mitch McConnell is reelected or brings the articles or brings impeachment to a Senate vote, we can still look at Kathy McMorris Rogers here in Washington, who voted no on impeachment, and say, how do we support the rest of our state in getting better representation? So I think there is a battle for accountability at the federal level, but I think we also have to recognize that the things that are happening at the federal level are symptoms of a disease that is a lot more widespread and that needs to be stamped out at a broader level. I think there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of accountability and shoring up our local systems so that we have fallbacks for people that we're supporting, especially marginalized groups, and that we're doing the sorts of things to try to undo this mess that we're in right now, not just through voting.
And it won't be a fast process. I'm with you. Like, it's going to take us a lot of time to just start to unravel it. So one thing I think that is really important to recognize is kind of the alternate reality nature of what's happened, where I think increasingly we're still seeing this alternate reality of Trump world, of QAnon, that's been constructed and gamified in some ways for these folks to be active in and engage on. And we're in a tough spot where we can try to combat disinformation and news, and that'll lower the spread. But actually getting folks out of that sphere and back to reality is really hard. You can have individual conversations, but that only does so much. And Seth Abramson, who's a political scientist and journalist who I respect a lot, talked about this and the relation of it with alternate reality gaming, and how they're seeing a lot of the same techniques used by gaming companies to addict people to this kind of thing be used by propagandists to addict them to this like digital conspiracy theory grouping. And that essentially we have to find ways to have, I think the quote was, out of game, positive, enjoyable experiences, so they get less addicted to the entertainment value of what's happening. Because what they're getting is they're getting their exact beliefs reflected in this entertainment, this crazy entertainment cycle, but it feeds into what they want. And it can feel really hopeless when, as individuals, when we talk about this, when we try to talk to someone online about it and they just won't hear you, or when you just see that there are, QAnon members in Congress. Marjorie Taylor Greene is one interesting example. But we are making a little difference a little bit at a time, and gradually we'll chip away with it. And I think one of the big problems with politics is that we have this, we see these problems we want to fix, and it takes so long to get it done. And you got to have that perseverance. So I love that you're both talking about that. That's great. As far as, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that touches on responsibility to actually regulate what tech is doing, because I don't want to completely derail the conversation, but gamification is a real thing that, as someone in software, it gets brought up basically every feature that you're building. And so I have friends who have worked at Facebook, who work at Facebook, and I think without external pressure, they're not going to fix these problems on their own, just based on how much groupthink ends up happening at tech companies, especially when there's a self-selection for people who view Facebook's role as being a certain thing, and not really the monolith and media conglomerate that it is, right. And not really the conveyor of these white supremacist algorithms, essentially.
Yeah, I think your point about algorithms is really important, and the idea of we have to, like, I can enjoy that Donald Trump got banned off Twitter, and I can think that deplatforming him is a great thing because it means he's going to be able to spread less horror and conspiracy, and you're lowering his power and potential to do harm. But I can also think that Facebook and Twitter have way too much power, and big tech in general have way too much power, and we need to regulate how they work. Completely agree with that. Yeah. And I think one example maybe of what we can do locally that doesn't affect necessarily the uh, the buildup of big tech, but can be helpful as far as providing equal access to that big tech and leveling the playing field for individuals. Maybe municipal broadband is something for us to continue to have conversations around related.
Absolutely.
Dave, is that something that's come up at King County Council at all? I know that's usually more of a city issue.
It has not come up yet. We're in the middle of a contract with our current provider, but I expect when that contract is up, we'll have a discussion. We do provide services in unincorporated areas where there's no cities. So
Yeah.
I anticipate that there will be some discussions moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's less of a solution to the issue of radicalization, but
It's definitely not. Yeah.
It's definitely a huge piece of inequity right now in terms of who has access to learning, who has access to jobs where they can shelter in place and work remotely, in terms of who can have telemedicine appointments versus having to go in person. The digital divide is only becoming bigger, and so it's definitely something that we need to address now versus later.
And I think that kind of inequality, while it doesn't necessarily directly apply to radicalization, does also have an impact on people's state of mind. Whether it's are you angry? Are you broken and unable to access remote work, and so therefore you have to go get involved with the pandemic? And so there's this the pandemic really seems to have increased inequality. You've seen the gains that have been made as far as mass poverty and trying to pull people out of it have really fallen back. So there's definitely a lot of work to do across the board. What other issues are the both of you paying attention to nationally that you see opportunities to act on locally?
I think there's been a lot of attention around getting unhoused people into housing, both nationally in Seattle and around the region. And King County just took what I think is a exciting step. I operate under the belief that housing is a human right. It means we have responsibility to help chronically homeless get off the street into housing with services and support. And I make the case down here in South King County that getting folks housed and supported and stabilized, literally saves lives. And it's the right thing to do. Reduces police calls, hospital visits, taxpayer money in the long run. And, my community, I have to go out and make that argument. But I was excited to help pass recently a fairly big, bold new housing proposal at the county where we made a modest increase in the sales tax to generate more than $350 million to purchase available hotels and group living facilities around the county. And it's housing that already exists, so we don't have to build it. No bureaucratic plans, no years and years of expensive construction. The idea is action now. And I think with this investment, we should be able to move almost 2,000 chronically homeless individuals off the street and into stable long-term housing. And the residents will have on-site support, including mental health and addiction services. But we have challenges moving forward. We need to work together to actually build support for these investments in South King County, because this is something we do with cities that are willing. And so I'm working hard in South County to build a coalition. I call it In My Backyard Coalition, recognizing that these are amenities for communities that make them better. And I think if we're successful, we will save lives, improve the quality of life in South County. And so implementing that, I think it's one of the most meaningful steps forward the county's taken to help people who are unsheltered.
That's fantastic. I love that that's being done. Thanks for highlighting that for us. Jessi, is there anything in particular at a local level that you have your eye on as far as addressing that divide?
So I think we absolutely need to be focusing on housing first approaches. I really appreciate hearing that update from Dave. I think the thing that comes to mind in terms of things that we would like to see at the federal level that we can still make some headway on at the local level is healthcare access. So at the federal level, obviously there's Medicaid for all or Medicare for all. I always mix them up.
I do too, to be honest. So I'm glad you said it first. Because now I'll check myself and be like, oh yeah, that's
and
right.
I'm just like M for A. That's great.
Yeah, the hashtag. We got this. Yeah.
But that's going to take some political will, and that's going to take some
Mhm.
political lifting, and we'll see what can happen with a 50-50 Senate, where things are kind of hinging on what our lovely senators in West Virginia are going to do.
Yeah.
While Washington has enshrined a lot of rights in statute, some of the reproductive rights bills that I've talked about, there's definite momentum towards looking at more state single payer, but there's a robust public option here in terms of Apple Health and sorts of things for low income individuals.
Right.
But there's still a lot of access issues. So one, Washington has a huge number of Catholic affiliated hospitals, and that number of beds that are going to be affiliated with Catholic hospitals is only going to increase with the proposed merger that's happening between, I believe it's Virginia Mason and Franciscan.
Yeah, I figure. Okay, that makes sense.
And so some parts of the state, it will be, I think overall, don't quote me on the numbers, I believe overall it's about half of hospital beds in Washington will be religiously affiliated. And in some areas, like the Yakima area, it'll be about 75%. And so that's not good for people, women and people who can get pregnant, who might need abortions, not just in the, pre-planned elective, but also in getting treatment for miscarriages. That's not great for LGBTQ folks, especially folks who are trans getting gender affirming care. That's not great for people who need end of life options. And so in these different places, you don't have a great way to necessarily go to a secular hospital, depending on your insurance in certain areas, whether it's rural, whether it's just your insurance is limiting it. And so there's definitely still a lot that we can do to make sure that healthcare access is meaningful here for all forms of healthcare for all individuals.
So you're both leaders in the LGBTQ community. I'd love to hear from you two, since we're kind of delving into healthcare access issues that are related to that. What are other issues that the community is facing right now, particularly with COVID raging? Has there been, I don't actually know, has there been a major impact on LGBTQ people because of healthcare access issues around COVID? And what else is happening in Washington State that maybe we want to highlight?
I can start. I haven't looked at the data on COVID and LGBT populations, and I don't know if it's being gathered. Certainly have seen data that shows significant disparities in most other indicators. So it would not surprise me at all if there was a disproportionate impact. We see disproportionate impact on communities of color. We see it based on poverty,
Right.
And so I think all of our marginalized populations are seeing the existing inequalities made worse. In terms of other things happening, it actually was sort of a lively year in South King County in terms of actually some anti-LGBT pushback. I felt like I spent half my year proudly taking slings and arrows. It started with Drag Queen Story Hour at the Des Moines Library by my house, a wonderful program for families to come and have their kids read and books and learn about diversity and people who are different. And the far right came out in force and tried to shut it down. And so I volunteered to the library system to go introduce our speaker, Cookie Couture, and speak to the press and try to help the community get a positive message out. Soon after that, we had a church in Renton have their equality display vandalized out in front of their church. And so we gathered together as a community and held a vigil and worked together to rebuild their affirming, welcoming display. And then soon after that, we saw 2 teachers at Kennedy Catholic High School in Burien get terminated from their job because of their sexual orientation. And it was, I think I had had a glass of wine that night when a friend told me about it. And so I made a somewhat inflammatory Facebook post, which got picked up then quickly by the media. And I ended up, spending the next 2 days talking to every station, helping turn that tragedy into a learning experience. But it is a reminder of how far we still have to go. We've in LGBT equality, we've affirmed a number of rights in the law, but that doesn't mean they're there in practice. And there's a lot of people who have been left behind. We need to address the racism in the LGBT community and understand the intersectionality. We need to be a better voice for our trans members of our community. So there's a lot of work still. It was a reminder this year of how much work there still is to do, especially here in South King County.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think to your earlier question about data, I haven't seen data on necessarily health disparities, but in terms of economic disparities.
I can actually give a little info on that, Jessi, because I just looked it up while Dave was talking. Which is that I know I'm Googling I wonder, listening to Dave's story. Sorry, multitasking. But evidently there has been a major data issue because of folks who may go by they, them pronouns, or maybe transgender, and particularly in New York and California were the 2 places I saw highlighted, where we have millions of folks who may have COVID who are slipping under the kind of data stream. And so they're what's happening to them is not being acknowledged. And I didn't have a chance to read in depth or anything, but that seems like one clear area where, at least from data, part of the reason we're maybe not getting that data is because a lot of folks are being marginalized by the way our healthcare system is set up. So that's one reason we may not be seeing that. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I felt like it was good information.
No, that's great information. No, and that's something that honestly we've seen at the local level too. Like, we've tried to ask for data from, for instance, the navigation team prior to it being mostly disbanded, on whether folks were potentially refusing shelter because they had issues where shelters may not be open and friendly to people.
And sorry, Jessi, do you mind explaining what the navigation team is for anyone who's from outside of Seattle area?
Sure. So the navigation team is a group of social workers, and unfortunately there were a large number of police that went with them, that would be dispatched to folks who are chronically homeless to try to get them services. In Seattle, there's been some major concerns about homeless sweeps, essentially pushing folks who are chronically homeless and camping on public land from one area to another. As co-chair of the Seattle LGBTQ Commission, our commission has come out pretty strongly against the sweeps because we feel like it's not addressing the root issues, and it's dehumanizing and essentially robbing people of their little bits of shelter and privacy that they have. The navigation team did end up getting mostly defunded. I think there's still been some trickiness around that, because in the goal of trying to get fewer police officers to do this outreach, we ended up in a situation where it's now primarily police officers that are going to camps without some of the social work.
Well, that's mostly because Durkin's not wanted to move forward with the promise of what the council was seeking, basically. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole mess. We could spend an hour on that alone. But so in the past, we've asked for information about, the navigation team is supposed to make offer of shelter to folks, especially before they do any of these encampment removals or sweeps. And some people refuse shelter. And honestly, there are some good reasons for refusing shelter. Shelter system is tough. You don't have privacy. You don't have often the ability to know for sure that you're going to have a bed there for more than one night or even for that night. They're often not 24 hours. They often have requirements that you need to be sober or you can't have your pet or things like that. And what we see with the LGBTQ community is that folks who don't neatly fit into the gender binary or who are trans and maybe don't fit someone's definition of one gender or another may face more discrimination, especially when most of the shelters are single gender and some of them are religiously affiliated. We also have folks who want to go by a preferred name versus a legal name and running into issues with that. So we've asked for data in that regard, just to say, is how large of a problem is this? And can you really say you're offering meaningful shelter if there are these barriers there? And we haven't gotten it. So, I mean, there's also concern about violating people's safety and all that, where they may not want to come out to a random person asking them for data, but it's a constant problem. I would say from the perspective of data we have seen that economically, LGBTQ people have suffered more under the pandemic because they tend to be often in service positions. This is especially folks who have intersecting identities, so people who are Black and queer, who are Latinx and queer, and especially folks who are trans as opposed to cisgender. So there's a definite issue, and especially with older LGBTQ folks who may not have as much of a family network to help support them when they are also in a higher risk category for COVID. So there's a lot of issues here that it basically, the more identities you have, the more that's stacked against you in the pandemic.
I think that's a really good point. We've talked a little bit about the inequality gap and how it's been increased by the pandemic. And I think that's one thing where if we look at nationally and also at the state level, Democrats need to deliver and try to reduce that inequality ASAP. Otherwise, we're going to see, massive incomes for youth, massive incomes for people who are houseless right now, massive, impacts. And I said income, sorry, impacts for folks who, maybe are just struggling economically right now. And we're going to see increases in every, bad healthcare outcome, negative economic outcome that we could potentially see. So I love that challenging the navigation team and the city to consider categories that they, are traditionally. I think it's awesome to have two leaders like yourselves on who are pushing on ensuring that we have equal access, whether it's to a library, to schooling or to, social services. So thank you both for everything you're doing on that. That's fantastic.
And I know this is almost a cliche, but we really are in a moment where we have an opportunity to kind of build back differently. There's been
build back better, you almost say.
Yeah, I know it's the Biden slogan, but that's why I said it's a cliche. Yeah. But we've had so much disruption. I think we're kind of at an inflection point where I also think the public will give elected officials more room to be bigger and bolder. There's so many things that are pretty straightforward that Democrats could be doing to deal with that inequality gap. We have a crisis looming in terms of folks who haven't been able to pay their rent whenever that eviction moratorium is over. The federal government gave some money to the states. The county is going to get $45 million for us to get out the door soon, but that doesn't go that far over time. We have, Jessi talked about the need for healthcare. We have a huge childcare need right now. And the county is, at the risk of getting too far off the subject, we're have an opportunity on the August ballot to renew our Best Starts for Kids ballot measure that funds youth and prevention programs. And I'm supporting, and I know the executive is, expanding that levy to include childcare, to have local subsidies for copays and subsidies for low income folks who need it, to provide some wage subsidies to low wage childcare workers. These basic things, housing, healthcare, childcare, and a lot of the burden is going to be on our state to come up with the revenue. And we certainly have folks in the state who can afford to pay more at the top. And it seems like such a no-brainer, as they say, good policy, good politics, to implement new progressive revenue measures and invest in those areas. Just a bread and butter Democratic agenda.
Absolutely. And I think you nail it when you say like the key things people need are, shelter. They need, the capacity to live, whether it's, healthcare or food, and they need the ability to try to build a better life for themselves economically. So I love that we're talking about the marginalized communities that are being left out of those equations, and I think that's really important to recognize. To kind of bring this back a little bit to our radicalization discussion earlier, one of the things that folks have said can potentially leave someone open to radicalization is stuff like economic inequality and the inability to kind of win within the system, so to speak. But at the same time, we also saw at the national level in the insurrection, folks who are driving Bentleys and very expensive trucks. How can we try to help folks who are struggling with the inequality divides in this country and are maybe falling into um, radical right wing information spheres because of anger and frustration, while also dealing with the folks who are on the completely opposite end of the economic scale and are causing so much damage? That's kind of a broad question, but I'm thinking about
I think it's Jesse's turn.
it. Under the bus.
No, I'm happy to go. I
mean, so I think we have to be careful here, right? Like yes, radicalization and conspiracy mindedness can definitely increase when stressors, including economic stressors, are there. But the folks that we saw at the Capitol, like you said, a lot of them were not facing those economic challenges. What has radicalized them is really a feeling of losing their power in terms
their white supremacist power.
Yeah, their white supremacist power, often their male patriarchal power, but white women are definitely in that crowd too. And so I think that, yes, we need to make sure that we're taking care of people, but we're not seeing, economically stressed Black people and Latinx people doing the same sorts of things that these white people are doing. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping those two things separate.
Totally.
I think in terms of addressing it, like you said earlier, someone who is in deep, it's going to take some time to get them out of there. I think Michael Hobbs of the You're Wrong About podcast.
Fantastic podcast.
Yeah, fantastic podcast. He wrote a piece for Huffington Post and did a basically partner episode on his podcast about losing relatives to Fox News. And he has a lot of nuance in there about, educating people on how Facebook's recommendation engine works, actually providing counter narratives to conspiracies instead of repeating them while saying this is not true. Those sorts of things can definitely help, but the best medicine is to try to prevent people from getting radicalized in the first point. And so I think we need to really start holding tech companies accountable for what they've done to our country and to our world. This isn't a uniquely American problem. But frankly, like I said earlier, I don't think they're going to address it without actual consequences from the government, whether that's the federal government or the state governments or so on, because right now the allure of just doing whatever the shareholders want is too strong. And so I think we actually need to get people to start building policy around tech and have it actually be informed policy and not, old senators asking how the internet works and making comparisons to trucks or whatever that was.
Series of tubes.
Yes. But we actually need to have some real conversations about what does the future of the internet look like? How does that work with our Constitution? How does that work in terms of like First Amendment? All the things that the conservatives are yelling about but don't understand. But there are real considerations for, what does access and speech look like? What does it mean to prevent harassment? We should have addressed this ages ago. Like Gamergate was kind of the first hint that this was coming, and that was almost a decade ago at this point. But really, we need to actually start addressing it, and we need to actually start holding tech companies accountable in ways where we haven't. So,
yeah.
Dave, I don't know if you have anything.
No, I'll start where you started. I think you were spot on that this is not, that we saw at the Capitol was not necessarily marginalized folks. It was a reaction, exactly as you, I couldn't have said it better, to people feeling like they're losing their power, white and male. These are, a lot of them are folks with Ford 150 expensive pickup trucks with their Trump flags flying, and it just, but there is, Jessi talked about some of the more technical solutions. I also think that if the system can deliver better, then people will be less alienated. There are folks, not the ones who are rioting, but there are certainly a lot of people in my community who just feel that the government, broadly defined, isn't relevant or serving them and their needs. And I think there has been some timidness on the part of elected officials to do big things that might feel like big to those of us who are inside the system, but would be meaningful to touch people's lives. And I think until we can start actually helping people with the things that affect their lives, healthcare, childcare, wages, being able to have a roof over your head, that can help, I think, some with people of all political spectrums who are alienated, including, I think there are some on the right who, I don't know if they're reachable or not. I think of the folks who say, like, no socialized medicine, keep your hands off my Medicare. There's these intellectual disconnects. But the issues, those core human issues of healthcare, housing, wages, should appeal across the political spectrum. But I just don't think at the federal, state, or local levels we have delivered in a meaningful way in recent years.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we do, with the trifecta at the national level, we can deliver in some ways, whether it's, funding for cities to, build more transit, or $2,000 checks for folks, or healthcare reform. But it's hard to really sell that message, right? That you're talking about, Dave, of, wages, healthcare, housing, if we don't actually act on it. So,
Yep.
a $15 minimum wage nationally would be great. Like, hopefully that's something, Biden tweeted that out the other day. Maybe it'll happen.
One of the things that we're really up against is there's this very American notion that it is better to prevent one unworthy person from getting a service or a good or a benefit, even at the expense of, thousands of people potentially getting help that they really need. We see it in terms of the conversations around voter fraud. Like, it's better to prevent one person from maybe voting twice, even if it disenfranchises 500,000. We see it with the conversations around government benefits. And we see it, my former stepdad essentially started to become radicalized right at the end of his marriage to my mom. Like, he became a birther, right, when she was divorcing him. And the seeds were there all along. But around that time, he was also talking a lot about how he saw people who weren't working as hard as him, who were getting more than him. Like, they were getting welfare or food stamps or things that he wasn't getting. And I think, to Dave's point, if we delivered for all people, that removes that talking point. But I think there's also this notion that we need to flip on its head, that it is better to care for people than to punish everyone to make sure that one unworthy person doesn't slip through doesn't skip the line ahead of time. It's also happening with the vaccination conversations right now. Like, the way that we're trying to test exactly who needs to be first in line is slowing down getting vaccines in arms. It's better if one person skips the line, but the whole line moves a lot faster, versus slowing everything down to try to prevent that one unworthy person. So
yeah, the rage I feel when I hear, news reports about, oh, they're throwing out vaccine samples at the end of the day, is very equivalent, I think, in a lot of ways, to the rage I felt, today, listening to Republicans lie on the floor about supporting white supremacy and, inciting the attack on the Capitol, where it's just a failure, and it's frustrating because, I don't know if either of you watched Arnold Schwarzenegger's little clip about, his feelings about America, but, there are these moments where you see, an immigrant like him who really has this feeling of, this country I really delivered for me. There's these things, and I disagree with Arnold on a lot of stuff, but, there are good pieces of U.S. history, but the bad just feels so overwhelming often. Jim Crow, KKK, Civil War, slavery overall, and I'm, just the tip of the iceberg. That it's hard sometimes to find that kernel of truth and hope, and hold on to it and say, we can do better, we can do better. And I think we're all, particularly in a pandemic where we don't have the same social ability to say, oh, let me go hang out with a friend and, feel a little better. We're all kind of hitting that burnout at different stages where we feel, I'm trying to be politically active, I'm trying to engage and be helpful and do these things, and we hit this wall. So, I just appreciate the work you're both doing, and I guess now I'm curious, like, how are you both dealing with that burnout? Because I know I'm feeling it. I'm just scrolling Twitter like 30% of my day at least. So, like, yeah. it's tough. I'm coping.
It has been personally challenging for me. I'm embarrassed to say it because there are so many people who have it way more challenging than I do. I have a warm roof over my head. I'm in a home with a husband who cares about me. I have food, access to technology, so I don't really have room to complain, given the circumstances a lot of people are in. But it has taken an emotional toll, and I don't understand it. I feel anxious. I feel kind of agitated, and I don't think I have any secrets. I don't think I have any secrets to share with your listeners. I do my best to get outdoors and walk and get some exercise. I try to get my sleep, but politically, kind of like I said at the beginning, I'm looking for those areas where I can make a difference, where I can move the ball. It's like a two-pronged game. I'm part of a broader movement for change that can be frustrating at times, but we're working on that. We just put more money into free bus tickets for human service agencies. We take those little victories that both build momentum, but also, I think, help me remind me that this job does make a difference, and activism does make a difference. So finding those small wins in the larger battle, I think that's always important with organizing.
Totally.
But even more so, I think, right now in this environment, and to focus on the hope that is there. I actually do believe that this is a moment in time where we can do things differently. There aren't a lot of those. 9/11 shaped things up, not necessarily in a good way. In fact, a lot of ways in a bad way. But
Yeah.
this has the way our employment has changed dramatically from where people are working. Um, an awakening around racial justice that I hope is real and sustained. The way in which our healthcare system disparities have been laid bare by the pandemic. These are kind of big things that have actually reached out into the way people view society and maybe the role of government, that give me a little bit of hope that at the various levels of government we can do something different.
Totally. And before Jessi goes, I just want to say, Dave, we've got a really nice note in chat saying, no matter how privileged we are, it's been a hard time for everyone, and give yourself some grace to feel it. So and also another one saying, love your work in the county council and thanks for everything you're doing on that. So good abounds in many places.
Did you say it's from Chad?
No, from chat. Sorry.
From
I
Chad.
think
okay, that was my husband.
No, yeah. I'm sure he thinks the same thing. Sorry, Jessi. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I've been fairly open with the fact that I have depression. It has gotten bad enough in the past where when I was 19, 20, I was hospitalized for a few days, but because of getting a little too close to ending my life. It's something that runs in my family. My grandfather took his own life before I was born. There are a lot of folks on both sides that have struggled with this. And I try to talk about it because I want to destigmatize the fact that there are a lot of people who have these issues. Yeah. And it's real and it's tough. There are days where I don't want to get out of bed. Honestly, having my dog has helped a lot because I have to get out of bed. But the pandemic has pushed my buttons in certain ways. And for a while I was kind of riding high on campaigning, where my time was so filled that I didn't have time to think or fixate on things really. But I think after that, I had a tough time. And I live alone. I actually went and stayed with my parents for several weeks because for me, that was the best thing for my mental health. And there was part of me that felt like I was doing the irresponsible thing, flying and all that. But I had to tell myself, if this was, I had a heart condition and I had to fly to get a treatment, I would do it. I'm lucky that one, plane tickets were really cheap, and two, I had a job that allowed me to do that. But for me, it took trying to figure out how I could break some of that isolation and break some of the patterns that emerged for myself. I've been back here. I came back a little bit before Thanksgiving because I didn't want to travel back during the holidays, knowing that there'd be more people traveling. And I have to say, like, just having that reset really helped me. But I know that there are a lot of people who are suffering right now and who are in situations where they're dealing with interpersonal violence at home, where they're dealing with not being able to be their full selves at home, where they're having a lot of more economic stressors than I'm having, where they're maybe not able to get therapy and medication. I'm someone who resisted getting medication for a long time because of some really internalized stuff, especially from my family, about what medication, like, quote unquote, does to a person and numbs them out and blah, blah, blah. And for me, medication makes me be my best self, or be my functional self. And so I think we just need to, like the person in the chat said, give each other all a little grace. We're getting through this the way that we can, and know that connection that you can build with someone makes a big difference. Even when I was feeling really low, just having a couple group chats with friends where people would check in on me made it feel more doable. And so I would say, even if you're doing okay, check in on your friends. Like, worst case, they're doing fine and you get to have a nice conversation.
Yeah.
Best case, you've helped someone when they're having a shitty time. So
I just want to say thank you so much for telling your story, Jessi. There's several folks in chat who are also sharing their own stories and saying thank you. So that's really meaningful. I know one person, Catherine, is saying that she resisted medication for a long time for some of the same reasons. And so I think it's a societal thing where we've been taught to think about mental health as weakness instead of just part of your health. You have overall health, and your physical health and your mental health are both parts of it, and you've got to work through it. And whether it's the newfangled like ketamine treatments, or traditional antidepressants, or spiritual practice around something else, or exercising regularly, whatever it is that you need to do to manage it. I mean, it's a necessary thing for you and for your body and your mind. And so thank you for telling your story and being so upfront and meaningful about it. And I know that matters to people. And thank you for making a difference on that. I know it's hard.
It's comforting to me. Some of the same things you said are some of the things I found in dealing with anxiety. The keeping busy, my best days are the days where I don't have gaps in my calendar. And it's the downtime that's hard. And also your comments about access to healthcare, finding the right medication without the side effects, that, getting the right treatment for your body or for our bodies isn't always easy. And if you have trouble accessing healthcare for something that requires quite a bit of communication potentially.
Or even the right therapist. I mean, the first therapist I went to, like in high school, I ended up writing fictionalized but not really fictionalized stories about her in my creative writing class, and just how terrible she made me feel and how ashamed she made me feel. And there's a lot in terms of how you click with another person, whether you're the sort of person who needs like tough love or reassurance or balance, where just finding a therapist can be such a crapshoot. And often you're trying to find them while you're feeling your lowest, while you're navigating. A lot of them like don't have openings or don't call you back, and you're trying to figure out if they even take your insurance. And so for me, one of the most meaningful things I've done is offer myself out as someone who will help you find a therapist.
That's
to
awesome.
my friends. And
I have a sort of funny story along those lines. Hopefully things have gotten better, but when I came out years ago, it was a challenging time. I'd had a relationship that ended while I was in the closet, and I knew I hadn't come out to anyone yet, but I knew I needed help. I was really down in the dumps, and I had to call my insurance company. And I'd never uttered the words "I'm gay." I never said it out loud. And this nice insurance rep on the phone, "And what is it you want to see treatment for?" Now I'm having to and I think I hung up. I think I wasn't going to talk to some stranger about my personal issue there. And then also the cost, even with good insurance, the out-of-pocket costs for like mental health professional is out of reach for a lot of people.
Yeah, my first therapist in Seattle, I was basically paying the same amount to her that I was paying in rent.
Yep.
Like it was obscene, but it was what I needed at the time. But I don't know how I would have. Honestly, I got in debt like at that time, and that's not doable for a lot of folks. I think to your story, part of the reason why I started becoming more visible in my own queerness is because of my little sister and the hard time she had dealing with her own sexuality. She's now very out at being gay. She doing all the college things with having cute girlfriends. But I realized that even though I had known for a long time that I was bisexual or queer, I had never really been loud about it. And she actually didn't know. And so she's 11 years younger than me. And when I left for college, she was still really young. And she got to the point where, sexuality plus our family history, she was having a really hard time and had to actually leave school for a week to do outpatient treatment. And when she finally came out to me, I had this realization of I have had this missed opportunity of modeling for her, like what it is to live life being okay with your sexuality. And so that was part of what really prompted me to fight more for queer representation and fight more for queer visibility.
That's awesome. I intentionally out myself, I think, whenever I speak to a group of young people. I could be invited to the local high school to talk about climate change. And I just make sure at some point in there I mention my husband. I just think there's a value. And the other group I always do that too is I'm speaking to a religious group just for fun. I always do that. And I think maybe because I'm a little older, I didn't have that as much. We had like the one teacher everyone knew was gay kind of thing, and we're at a point where it's kind of unremarkable, gay white male. I think I get more crap for my husband's and my age difference than the fact we're gay. It just we're in some areas, but being able to just be out, be visible, set the example is so important. It's the same way as sharing your story with your health issues. I think it's just part of leadership and make it easier for people who come behind us.
Yeah, I really love that you both shared these stories, and Dave, I love that you're continually sharing it, because I think the work you both do around this, whether it's talking about mental health, talking about coming out, talking about these issues, and sharing your personal experiences, is so powerful for folks. Like the whole idea of it gets better. It matters to keep telling stories of people who've made it through these things and are working through them and are fighting, because a lot of folks, it's hard to hear that. And one of the major impacts for the pandemic has been this mental health crisis, that we've all talked about here. I know I've really struggled sometimes during the course of this pandemic. It's something I've shared publicly is I was in an abusive relationship at the start of the pandemic, and had to leave my partner a couple of weeks in because forced proximity had really extended what was happening, and it had gotten extremely violent. And I finally kind of got to a point where I had the courage and the wherewithal to leave. And this the UN's called it the shadow pandemic, the increase in intimate partner violence, the increase in mental health issues that folks are suffering, and it's everyone. Whether it's someone who's experiencing intimate partner violence, or it's someone who Dave, like you generally, as you pointed out, like you're like, you're doing pretty well right now. Like you've got a house over your head, you got a couple of awesome cats, I don't want to call him like a great husband. Don't give Chad a big head, but you got a husband, and you're doing great work. But like you're struggling too. My parents who love each other very much and have a house over their heads, they're financially secure, struggling very much in some ways because it's a hard time for everyone. And I think it's really important that we all talk about that, and it's okay to not have the same amount of trauma or the same amount of hurt that someone else does because of your privilege and your experiences. But you can still share and talk to them and hear them. And so I really appreciate that you've all done that today and everyone in chat who's sharing their experiences as well. I think that's incredibly powerful. So thank you.
And I've said this to you before, Connor, but thank you for sharing your story. I think
Absolutely.
It's really important, especially to share stories that don't look like the stereotype in your head, because I think there is the tendency for people to say, well, this isn't real abuse because it's not
Right.
XYZ. And so I think the more people who can name, like, my experience doesn't look like XYZ, but it was abusive, the more you can help other folks get to that same point of seeking assistance. So I think it's a really powerful thing.
Thank you. And again, thank you both for sharing everything you've experienced as well. I think that's really fantastic. And someone in chat, Aaron, is saying this: when real people share their real stories, it creates real change. And I think that's a lot of real, but it's a very powerful truth. So thank you, Aaron, and everyone else for tuning in and listening to this. We've got about 20 minutes left here, and I know Dave needs to hop off. So before we, I've got other things I can ask you both about, but I'm really curious, what's the thing that we haven't talked about today that's like burning you up that you really want to talk about? Is there something that maybe you want to address or come back to on an issue we talked about earlier or an issue that we haven't talked about? Is there something that in mind that?
So first, I want to grab my dog.
That I was going to ask before we got off that we could get a little dog image. So this is perfect.
Yes, show us.
Thank you.
What's their name?
This is Sammy.
Oh,
she is a year old. She's a corgi.
Oh. Hi, Sammy. Hi, Sammy. She looks a little nappy, just kind of sleepy over there.
Yeah, she has been sleeping most of this time, and then finally just woke up and started whining, which is why I thought to
include her in it. I love it.
So she has been my quarantine pal.
I love it. I think that's really important.
Yep. My cat plays this role. When you mentioned your dog, at the start of the show, there was a cat over my shoulder. That's Dobby, our house elf cat. And I kind of joke about it. It seems silly at times, but I honestly talk about how to get through difficult times or deal with anxiety or depression. And I found, believe it or not, pets are
really
important.
Good. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I could talk about my cat all day for 20 minutes.
We could do that. I mean, honestly, I love it.
There's a great plug. Oh, can I plug something? My web series, Staying Home with Dobby. You can find it on my Facebook page. I did about 10 episodes because Dobby's an indoor cat. And it was important during the pandemic for us all to be like Dobby and stay indoors. So I did
oh my gosh, I missed that.
A series of videos, and I'd highlight little public health tips or something that's going on in the community that week. They're about 2 or 3 minutes each, and so I commend you to that product. I was proud of. It kind of fizzled out after about 10 episodes, though.
You know what? 10 episodes is great, honestly. I think this is episode 6 of this Wednesday night thing, so I think you're doing better than I was.
One thing, I don't think this needs to be a long conversation, but one thing that I want to bring up, just because it is making me angry, is the Supreme Court ruled the other day in their first ruling post Amy Coney Barrett on abortion, that the abortion pill can't be prescribed via telemedicine, essentially. Like, you have to take it in person at the clinic. And this is problematic in general, like, even if it weren't a pandemic, just because there are folks who don't have easy access to clinics, and especially clinics that will provide this sort of care. It's especially impactful right now because, I had to go to the doctor last week, and Polyclinic is doing a great job. They have people giving out masks. They are screening people, blah, blah, blah. It still took me several hours to get through my kind of primary care appointment and some blood tests. And, there's all sorts of exposures that can happen. And even on the way there, because I don't have a car, am I taking public transit? Am I taking a Lyft, etc.? But I feel like this is also a sign of what's to come in the battle for reproductive rights. It's a sign of what has been happening. I don't think they're necessarily going to strike down Roe v. Wade because conservatives like having Roe v. Wade as a boogeyman that they can rile up their base with. But I think they're going to continue to chip away at rights in a way that especially widens the gap between folks who have money and access and often whiteness and those who don't. And so this is an issue that I hope that we can address via legislation, but for too long we have let abortion be marginalized as a illegitimate health care, even though it is health care.
Yeah.
So that's just my soapbox.
No, that's a great soapbox, and it's a really good call out to point out, because it's another thing that lines up with what we've been talking about a lot of this discussion, which is that inequality is baked into our society, and we need to try to break it down. And that with the pandemic and obstructionism from right-wing folks, it's increasing in some places, and it's great that you're highlighting that. So thank you. Dave, did you have a topic you wanted to make sure to bring up?
A burning issue?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll make another plug for what's going to soon be a ballot measure, the King County's Best Starts for Kids measure. When I first started in this job, I sat down with a group of young African Americans in a mentoring program at Phoenix Academy in Kent. And 201, they told me how when they interacted with the criminal legal system, it made it harder, not easier, to get back on the right path in life. And working with the leader of that mentoring program and human service people all over King County, we passed the Best Starts for Kids ballot measure. And now we have a program at South Center Mall in my district where if a young person shoplifts, instead of immediately being thrown in the back of a police cruiser, they're instead immediately paired up with a counselor on site who cares about them and their future. And as a result, more than 174 young people, mostly kids of color, have first avoided a criminal record and second turned their lives around. And that's the kind of change that's possible from the Best Starts for Kids levy. And we have a chance to renew that levy this August and expand it to provide support for childcare. And so as folks see that on the ballot, one is there's an opportunity to help shape the strategies between now and then at the county level, and then hopefully support that funding measure. We're one of the only major counties in the country that puts this level of funding. It's about $70 million a year into youth prevention, starting with early childhood up to programs to end the school to prison pipeline. And it's something that I think is going to be important, critical in this time for us to renew that funding source. It would be great to have it's a property tax levy lid lift. It would be great if the legislature would give us better funding tools, but that's the tool we've gotten, and it's well worth the investment.
I love that you're highlighting that, because I think it's really important, and it's obviously doing incredible work. And I will note for folks who are watching, Jessi just lost connectivity, so she'll hopefully be back in a second.
Oh no!
But Dave and I can continue on here. So yeah, vote for Best Start for Kids if you're in King County, August, in the August primary. I think that's a great highlight, Dave, and I do agree with you that putting money into early childhood education, early childhood prevention from school to prison pipeline is incredibly important. It's something that has long lasting impacts and can reduce that inequality we've been talking about. And honestly, it saves the state a lot of money in the long term too. If you want to look at it from a very conservative mindset of, if you keep folks, from on the straight and narrow, if you can keep folks out of prison, if you can keep folks as productive members of society, and I know these are catch-all terms that are being used, but doing that is so impactful that they'll return taxes. They don't cost in social programs. There's this long-term benefit to what we're doing, and a lot of times in government we talk about things we need to do, and we don't think about the long-term implications of some of the preventative things we can do. So that's a fantastic program to highlight. Thank you.
And there's stories like that all over the county.
Yeah.
That was just one program that I was familiar with and was been involved in. But
yeah, and I think that's great. And it's a good highlight to say that there's multiple programs. So before we get lost in it, though, I do want to ask you, because I was prompted to ask you about. I heard you got in a fight with the Mariners a couple of years ago, and I really want to hear this story, because just to end on a little bit of a lighter note.
Yep, it was probably the most press I've ever gotten. You might recall a few years back, the King County Council was presented with a proposal to spend $185 million on upgrades to Safeco Field, such as building a new brew pub and upgrading the Diamond Club where the expensive seats are.
Yep.
I happen to know that 185 million could instead legally be spent on housing, and I believed it should be spent on housing. So I stood up, I spoke out. What did I discover, though? As you mentioned, I discovered I was alone. No one on the council shared my thinking.
Wow.
And I discovered I was causing trouble. And my position made a lot of people unhappy with me. But I decided to act. I made the case publicly. I made the case to my colleagues. And I convinced 3 of them to join me. But on the county council, unfortunately, 3 more votes were not enough to carry the day. But it was enough to move $50 million over into housing. And it's housing that working people can afford. And it's because of that we were able to fund programs like the Abbey Ridge Housing Development and CTAC in my neck of the woods. It's providing 144 units of affordable housing. And so it was just a lesson that when you believe it's right for the community, take the advice of John Lewis. What is it he said? Never, ever be afraid to make some good noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. I think it's a good time to keep as we move forward politically now, to keep his wisdom in mind. And it was one of the more enjoyable fights I've engaged in. But I've discovered taking on sports fans isn't always popular.
No, but you made a $50 million difference. And
that's what I figured.
That's a great one. I can definitely feel you on the sports fan arguments. I helped out with an initiative to support the Port of Seattle that was not particularly a great thing for some Sonics fans who wanted us to vacate a street that was being used for access to cargo. And so I hear you. Sometimes
now basketball's a different story.
Yeah, I know we got our hands there.
I work part-time as a basketball referee. I don't know if you knew that.
I forgot about that. That's right. Yeah.
I'm taking some time off this last year or two, but I've also discovered there's a lot of similarities between my job as an elected official and my job as a basketball referee.
Really?
In both cases, only you know in your heart whether or not you're being fair and doing the best job you can. In both cases, there's often people literally yelling at you while you're trying to do your job.
Yeah.
And in both cases, when the game's over, you slink off the court, disappear, and everyone's mad at you. So it's been good practice for me being a sports referee.
Oh man, yeah, Jessi, you missed our discussion of affordable housing and the Mariners, and then we've delved into basketball refereeing since Dave does some.
We were stalling for you to come back.
Basically, we're like, do we need Jessi back here?
We need the
what do we talk about?
Heft.
Pretty much.
Well, I kind of related. I would appreciate Dave's perspective on. I feel like the phrase "a regional approach to homelessness" is often thrown about by folks who really want to block Seattle from doing anything. And I would just appreciate your perspective on, do we think that this is something that the county
can do together, address together, that we think it should address together. What is the realistic approach here?
Well, the answer of should we is yes. We should have. That being said, I was the only no vote on the Regional Housing Authority that was created, but not because I didn't think we need a regional approach. I think within a regional approach, we need to allow flexibility around strategies. And I don't know if it's possible. The politics in the community I represent are very different than the politics in Seattle. And it doesn't mean we can't get there. It means people like me and others need to constantly make the case. Like when I was talking about our sales tax and housing proposal, I think in Seattle, you don't have to go make the case that this saves taxpayer money, it saves lives. But as I talk about these in Kent, Renton, SeaTac, where there isn't necessarily in all the cases local government elected officials willing to view these housing solutions as benefits. They're too often viewed as something to be concerned about.
Something that's enabling, or
yeah, if you build it, they will come. One of the things that I don't know if this is an answer to the question, but during the pandemic, we created some de-intensification shelters. We are leasing hotels around the county to keep people safe and separate. It was kind of it's the right thing to do, and it's saving lives, and we don't want anyone kicked out on the street. But because it was done using emergency authority, you didn't have that upfront engagement. All the best practices about siting facilities are all about early engagement, involve the community. And so it was necessary. It was an emergency, but for the county to come in and say, boom, we're doing this. It's not zoned for it. The city doesn't have to permit it. Boom, boom, boom. Created friction. And not even necessarily among folks who are ideologically opposed. The city of Renton, for example, I don't believe their council and mayor are ideologically opposed to providing services for homeless. There's just a turf war underway about which government gets to control it. And I'm not convinced the Regional Housing Authority is the right mechanism. We got to make it work. It's what we have now. But these lines, political boundaries are completely arbitrary when you're unsheltered. Heck, half the elected officials can't tell where the line is between their city and the next. And so these are artificial boundaries we've created. But the different politics are real. And I think it's just, we have a lot of work to do in South King County to keep if the people speak up, elected officials follow. And so it's an education process. And I think getting some on the ground, we got a women's shelter in Burien, Mary's Place, about as innocuous, it's a high barrier, kids in the Highline School District, well-known provider, but it was still a big battle at the city council. Neighborhoods inflamed, and so the challenges of siting a low barrier day shelter, things like that, the permanent supported housing, are going to involve a lot of community engagement. And I don't know that just the county trying to force it will be sustainable. I think we've got to go out and engage those communities and bring them along and engage politically in electoral politics in these suburban cities to ensure we have people who support those visions. So I'm a little cynical. I think we can get there. It just isn't. I don't think passing a new governance structure magically makes those tensions go away.
Yeah, I know. So in my family, one of my uncles has struggled with alcoholism his whole adult life. And he was sober for, I think, like 2 decades, but relapsed in the past 10 years. And for a while, his housing situation was precarious. And during that time, his alcoholism got worse. My dad is lucky enough to be in a financial situation now where he dipped into his retirement. His brother is a good deal older than him and basically helped get a condo for my uncle. And in having removed that question of where he's going to live, whether it's sober housing, whether it's with another relative, etc., he has been able to have a sense of self and a sense of stability and recovery, that he's not fully sober at this point, but he's doing a lot better than he was. And I feel like it shouldn't be as hard of a push to tell people that if you remove that all-consuming worry about where am I going to sleep tomorrow, then you can start actually concentrating on surviving and on
Right.
addressing all of your other concerns. And so I'm just, Dave, I know you have to leave soon, but I just want to see us move something forward and stop having the city point at the county, point at the state, point at the city, for who has to raise the money, because people are suffering right now, and we need to actually make it happen.
We have a great opportunity with we called it, we had some clever name, the Healthy Housing Initiative, the sales tax that we're going to borrow against and do it. But so we ponied up, we've got the dollars, we have a good plan in place, prices are low, but we need willing city partners. And I think some of the tension is Seattle is willing, but they're saying, why, the need is everywhere. And so my challenge is to try to build support among city officials in the South End to be willing to zone and permit this emergency housing, eventually permanent supported housing. And I'm finding, and I've struggled with this, I'm trying to, because I want to be able to move people's public opinion. And I found what works best is kind of meeting people where they are instead of judging people who are more conservative. And if you picture someone who's asleep in the doorway of the Burien Library, not hard to picture. Two people walk in, one's Susan and one is John. Susan looks down and sees that person in the doorway and says, we need to find a home for this person because we're the richest country in the world. This is immoral. This is someone's son or daughter. We have a moral responsibility to get them housing. The government needs to help. Someone else, John, may walk into the library and see that person and say, we need to get this person out of here because they smell bad. And I think they might have drugs on them. And I have my kids with me. And this is a blight to our community. The government needs to do something. We then take those 2 points of view and fight in the square over who's morally right and wrong. And I have my opinion, but I think everyone has a little bit of John and Susan in them. Everyone has gut reactions. And instead, we got to focus on the fact that both of those people agree that the government has a role to play in finding a solution for this and trying to depoliticize it a little bit and instead say what works and how do we make that happen? Because the frustration with, I guess, people aren't as altruistic as those of us on this call. And everyone isn't as good. Even good people are inherently selfish. And I'm shocked by even friends of mine, the comments they'll make about someone who is unsheltered. They say it's a problem. And they're not saying it's a problem for the unsheltered person. They say it's a problem for me because I have to look at this and they're leaving garbage in my neighborhood. And that is, I think that's a selfish view, but it's real among a lot of people. And when we just attack them for that, then it all melts down. And so in this, I think it's a communications challenge in the suburbs that I've been giving a lot of thought to, and how you build that coalition and build that support. At the end of the day, these cities have the zoning and permitting authority. That's no way around it. Each of those individual city councils can zone and permit. And so I think we can get there. I think the new county funding to purchase hotels and long-term care facilities is a bright spot we can build upon.
Well, thank you both for this great discussion. It's been really fantastic to get both your perspectives, and the back and forth on this has been really interesting. And thank you both for sharing your stories and talking about these important issues. I want to highlight before we close out Jessi Murray on Twitter, fantastic job, really interesting content. CM Dave Upthegrove on Twitter, also great. His Facebook's great too. I evidently missed a wonderful period with Dobby, his fantastic cat. And then one more plug that Dave mentioned is that we have a ballot measure in King County this August to help kids who are struggling with poverty, help kids who are struggling and may end up in the school to prison pipeline. And let's make sure that we don't see that happen, and we continue the funding for that. So any closing words from either of you before we wrap up here?
No, I enjoyed it. I'd keep talking all night if I could.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate you coming on. We'll definitely have you back on sometime later this year if, when you got time. So.
All right, great.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what Dave said earlier. As we fight these longer battles to really improve people's lives, we need to still celebrate the small victories along the way. Yeah. That's what'll make it sustainable. So thank you, Dave, for doing what you do and representing us.
Yeah. And likewise, it was nice to meet you in chat.
Yeah.
Chat, thanks everyone for tuning in, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and talk to y'all soon. End the stream.
Thanks,
here.
Connor.
Bye all.
Thanks, Connor.